This. Let me just tell you a little bit about how this came about. I need to give credit to a guy named Chuck, and I don't even know Chuck's last name. So Chuck, if you're here, I say thank you, and you can wave your hand in a little while. I used to have a Christian radio station here, or Christian radio show here in town in the afternoons. There was a gentleman named Chuck that listened almost every day. We had some wonderful dialogue both on air and also would email me, and found out Chuck was an atheist. So he listened to my show every day, and really helped me immensely to put a face on atheism. I found we actually had a great deal in common, agreed on more than we disagreed, actually. And I can remember a point about 3 years ago on the National Day of Prayer. There was a special prayer gathering at the foot of the Capitol steps here in Austin, and they had asked me to come and open in prayer. I went to pray, and when I went to pray, there was a crowd at the south steps of the Capitol, and there was also a group of picketers over to the side.
That was you.
Separation of church and state. Yeah, that was me. So we're about to get started, and here comes one of the picketers out of the crowd carrying his sign over to us, and everybody's kind of watching, and he comes over and says, "Are you Ryan?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "I'm Chuck." And I said, "Hey, Chuck." And so we shook hands, said hello, how's your family, what have you, and just had a great conversation. And then he walked over to his place, and I walked over to mine, and I thought, nowhere else but Austin, Texas can that happen. So I thought, when I heard that American Atheists were coming for the convention, and by the way, we welcome you to Austin, it just seemed like the perfect occasion to maybe have a conversation that goes a little bit deeper, or depending on your perspective, shallower today, than your average debate, so that we can maybe probe some different questions than what is normally expected. And so I think we need to have some presuppositions. First of all, no one comes to this discussion completely neutral or objective, right? I mean, you walked in here with some presuppositions, and it's a little naive to think, unless the Spirit of God works, that you're going to walk out in a different way. So when we have an hour and 15 minutes together, is it fair to say, rather than setting up two podiums, and there's a place for this, and I enjoy a spirited debate where we give you 15 minutes and we take 15 minutes, and the people who came to cheer for the atheists, cheer for the atheists, and the people who came to cheer for the Christians, cheer for the Christians, and then we all go home. I think we could maybe be better served if we take a few moments to better understand some of the perspectives on either side. And I'll tell you, and I think it's worth noting that that's a reasonable mutual goal. So let me say to the Christians in the room, first of all, when I contacted David Silverman to ask him to do this, he did not have to do this. He had a convention to plan, all sorts of activity to undergo, and I'm grateful to him for his willingness to do this. And so thank you, David Silverman, for making this happen. I think it's fair to say that we, as Christians at times, do a pretty poor job of just addressing straw men rather than focusing on real problems or the personalities that people really have. And so rather than set up straw men tonight, hopefully we can tear some of those down and learn a little bit more about one another. The previously agreed upon goal for this discussion is to gain a better understanding of one another's positions in a setting designed more for dialogue than debate, and to demonstrate to others that non-threatening conversations can take place between those who disagree. And so that hopefully avoids two extremes. One extreme is to sit down and pretend like we agree on everything. That's not true. The other would be to sit down and shout at one another and hope that our volume will change minds. And so we're going to do neither, I hope. And I know one may roll his eyes and say, well, what's the difference between a debate and a discussion? I would presume that a debate is seeking victory, whereas a discussion might be seeking understanding. And that would be the difference tonight. To be a little bit more specific, Christopher Hitchens likes to tell the story about the last day of Gloria Steinem before she died. And on her deathbed, he says that she said, "Well, what's the answer?" And then there was silence. And so when she heard the silence, she said, "Well, in that case, what's the question?" And I think a lot of the dialogues we've had and debates really focus on the answers, shouting the answers. But if we can step back and talk about some of the questions, perhaps we could have some more fruitful dialogue down the road. So I'd like to begin by introducing our participants tonight. I'll let them actually introduce themselves, and then we'll introduce some others in the audience from our side and also from theirs, and go from there. So we'll start with our guest, David Silverman. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everybody. Well, I want to start and thank you, Ryan, for putting this together and making this all happen. And thank you all for coming. This is going to be a fun evening. And thank you all for coming. My goodness, I expected a small room. I think the first room that you put together was going to hold 50 people. Yeah, that wasn't. You didn't count on the atheists showing up. You didn't count on the atheists showing up. Okay, so I got 5 people in the room. For the rest of the 95% of the people who don't know who I am, my name is David Silverman. I'm the president of American Atheists. American Atheists is America's oldest nonprofit organization by and for atheists. It was founded right here in Austin, Texas in 1963 by Madalyn Murray O'Hair. And this weekend we are celebrating our 50th anniversary by having our national convention right here in this hotel. So I'm really glad to start it off on such a positive, friendly note. Thank you, Austin, for welcoming us atheists here. We really appreciate your hospitality. Please.
Good evening. My name's Kathleen Johnson. I'm Vice President of American Atheists. I'm also something of a local. I live right up the road just outside Killeen, and I work on Fort Hood and went to work today, came down here tonight. Originally, I wasn't going to come down until tomorrow, but Dave Silverman told me a couple days ago, he says, if you come down Wednesday night, we got something kind of interesting going on. You might want to participate. And I didn't find out till we were out here that it was an interfaith panel with a room full of Christians and stuff like that. If I'd known that, I would have stopped off at Threadkills on the way here and got a little courage. Oh, we didn't bring that. They did. Anyway, this is great. I think it's going to be fun. It's going to be a great night. Hello, American Atheists, and hello, Austinites, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Anthony Grayling. I'm from England. I'm delighted to be here. My gratitude to Dave Silverman for inviting me to participate in this convention. It's very exciting, and I'm delighted, really, to be taking part in the 50th anniversary celebrations. I'm also really delighted and very heartwarmed by the fact that some of your pastors in Austin want to meet us and talk with us. Ryan, thank you very much for organizing this. And thank you, Austin, for your hospitality.
David, I also know there are some other leaders perhaps in the room that you might want to introduce.
Oh, sure. Just a couple of quick shout out here. First of all, that really handsome guy with the goatee back there is Matt Delahunty, the president of the atheist community of Austin. If you think you've got a question that no atheist can answer, I double dog dare you to bring it to Matt Delahunty, but you have to listen for the answer. I also like to shout out to Sarah Moorhead. Are you here, Sarah? Recovering from religion. There she is. If you're one of the 99% of the Christians in this country who are actually doubting your religious belief. Oh, well, that fell short. If you're doubting your religious belief, you really should talk to Sarah. She is great for helping people transition from a life of theism to a life of atheism. Is Christine Shelska here? Chris? Well, she's from Atheist Alliance International, one of the largest international atheist organizations, and they'll have a table here over the weekend. I thought she was going to be here, but that'll be all for now.
Okay, very well. Welcome. All right. I'm Ryan Rush, the pastor of Bannockburn Baptist Church in South Austin. Honored to be here and a part of this panel. Rob? Thank you.
My name is Rob Harrell. I pastor a church down in Southwest Austin, First Evangelical Free Church. If you can say it, I'll give you a reward. It's a long name. It's really a delight to be here, and we're just thrilled to have a dialogue. This is going to be terrific, and just encourage everyone to just enjoy learning tonight. I think that'd be terrific.
I'm Tim Hawks, and I'm the pastor of Hill Country Bible Church here in Austin, and been here for a long time. Really love these guys that we co-labor with as pastors here in town. Also, this is a really special treat for me. Let me brag on one of our guests. Anthony Grayling has been a real inspiration in that my daughter traveled to London to do a research project on religion in the public sphere. And so she interviewed the leading atheists and secularists. She interviewed the Muslim leadership and the Christian leadership, trying to find out what their perspective was on the open discussion that happens in London and whether that's good or bad for religious tolerance. And Anthony gave her 3 hours in the first interview. So you can imagine this girl right out of college in London looking to talk to these great thinkers. And that first meeting, she came away saying, this man was wonderful. So we got all his books at our house. She's read them all. And he's continued to allow a dialogue to take place. And the other thing I really appreciate about you is you bring your beliefs. Like you brought it really strong to her. So she had a chance to really understand and evaluate. So thank you very much.
All right, Tim Hawks.
My name is Will Davis Jr. I am an Austin native, born and raised here. Remember Dr. O'Hare? Used to ride my bike not far over on Hancock, where the American Atheist Center was first located. And they had to guard it up and guard it and could get egged and shot at and all those crazy things. It was really a rough day back in those days to be an atheist in Austin, Texas.
And that was the easy place.
That was the easy place.
Came here because it was easy.
Well, I want to tell you, welcome. This is, in my opinion, the greatest city in the world. I'm spoiled rotten to live here. If you get a chance to get out, I've told you guys that. Go out and poke around. You'll love it. David, if you can't finish The Shiner and you want to take this conversation offline later, I will with you with one of those right there. I'll join you, okay?
Rock and roll, man. Rock and roll.
Rock and roll, baby. I can do that.
So we all know which pastor brought the beer.
I don't believe in God, but I do believe I'll have another.
All right.
About our favorite bands. And do I need to move on?
No, go right ahead.
We're talking about our favorite bands, and he said, Doobie Brothers, I like them except for Jesus is Just All Right, which, whatever. We'll talk about that later.
You're okay.
Kathy, if I can call you that, I'm genuinely going to welcome you, and she's a 3-tour veteran friend, so we need to thank her and honor her for serving. Very cool. That's very cool. I'm serious. I mean, wow. And Professor Grayling, it is an honor to sit with you. And in all due respect, sir, you have amazing hair, and I want it. You could be a rock star in a New York minute, dude. I love your hair. So welcome to Austin.
All right.
You could be a rock star.
Let me share with you some others in the room. Paul Ojeda, pastor, Austin Powerhouse Church, good friend, wonderful man. Pastor Galen Clark from Greater Mount Zion Church here in town. Randy Phillips, pastor of Life Austin. I know, just speaking of some pastors, I know Mac Richard from Life Austin is, from Lake Hills Church. Where are you, Mac? All right. Good to see you, buddy. Honored that you're here, so many others, and grateful to spend the evening with you all. Just a couple other housekeeping items. I was asked just a moment ago for those on the panel to get a little bit closer to your mics. There's people in the back of the room that really like to hear. And also, I was asked by both your public relations director and ours earlier, if there's any press in the room, they'd love to know so they can follow up with you later. Would you just raise your hand if you're with the press? Okay, there's no disdain there. All right, let's give the press a hand.
Shout it out.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, one other item, and then we'll get started. I'm going to ask something of you, a favor of you, audience, regardless of which background you came into the room with. I'd ask that you preserve the spirit of the evening, and that means no shouts or retorts. I don't think that's really going to help. So if you can listen, I'm not. There's no legalism here. If you want to applaud in a congenial way, feel free, just as we have. But I don't think it's going to be helpful or move the ball down the field. That's an American expression. I don't think it's going to help for us to be ugly in that manner. Okay, and so we have some agreed upon questions, hopefully to help us understand one another better. The first question, I'll allow each of the participants to answer if you'd like, and after each answer, we'll have a follow-up question to clarify. And this question is this: what do you sense is the greatest misconception about your point of view? And so, from an atheist standpoint, what do you perceive as the greatest misconception about atheism? And likewise, from a Christian standpoint, what do you perceive as the greatest misconception? Who would like to go first?
You want to go first? Casey?
Yes, sure. I think the greatest misconception about atheism is, if you're an atheist, anything goes. And nothing could be further from the truth. Because most people who take an atheist stance in life do so because they've thought rather hard about what they think about the universe, what they think about humankind in this world of ours. And they therefore think also about their relationships to other people. Because we all know that good relationships lie at the very heart of good lives. We're social animals. We need one another. We need to establish friendships. We need to give love and to be loved in return. Therefore, we need to be very responsible and careful in the way that we relate to others. So this great misconception, if you're an atheist, there's nobody watching you even when you're on your own in the dark so you can get up to anything. That's a terrible misconception. Generally speaking, it's exactly the other way around.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. For the other side to respond, is that a valid assessment of how others see their movement? Any of you?
Not to me. I've never even thought that, in all honesty, because I know a lot of atheists and consider them friends, and most of them are very moral, great people. So I appreciate y'all may have been accused of that. I've never seen it or felt it personally.
And I guess I would say I do think that that's a straw man that frequently gets put out there, that if you take God out of the equation, then there is no moral compass at all. And so I do see that from time to time. Yeah.
Okay.
See, the thing about the moral compass is, one of the things that I say very often is that religion likes to take credit where it doesn't belong. So when we talk about morality, when we talk about the moral compass, it's really a chicken and egg thing. And the Christians will say it's the chicken, and the atheists will say it's the egg. The atheists will say that a human is moral, and that religion says you're moral because we told you to be moral. The Christian will say, well, I learned about morality from the Bible. Therefore, without the Bible, you don't have morality. But the atheists don't see it that way because we never had it in the first place. Because religion actually just takes the credit for everything that you do that's good. It actually subsumes that. And it's something that really is prevalent in when we get that. And then when we get that, you have no moral compass thing. It really kind of, it strikes us wrong, as AC was saying, because we have exactly the same moral compass. The only difference is that religious people assign the rightness to the Bible. That is why there are so many different interpretations of the Bible. You can find Christians who support anything, and they use it with the Bible, and they use that as their moral basis. But in reality, they're just making their own decisions, just like we are, and they're giving the credit to the religion.
So to restate what you've already said well, we as Christians would be guided by what we call the Great Commandment, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. I know we're not there together. But the second, likewise, to love your neighbor as yourself, which is supposed to be a driving force. That's something we'd find common ground on, to have common love of neighbor.
We might not actually, for the following reason. That's one way of articulating what's sometimes called the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And famously, George Bernard Shaw, the playwright, once said, under no circumstances should you do to others what you'd like them to do to you, because they may not like it. And it's actually quite a it's quite a deep insight, because what it reminds us is that there's a great diversity and plurality in human nature. And what we should do, if we really are going to be good neighbors to our fellow human beings, is to see them in their individuality, in their particularity, and to recognize that they might have interests and desires and capacities, talents for living lives which are very good on their own terms, that we ought to respect. But none of us really is in a position to be the standard or the benchmark for how everybody should behave or be treated.
Thank you. Now for the Christians, I would ask you the same question. I don't know which one would like to take it up. What do you sense is the greatest misconception about your point of view?
Ryan, could I just ask a real follow-up, David? One thing that's a curiosity for Christians regarding atheists, saying that there's a morality that you have and you adhere to, it is a wonder in Christians to know what the basis of that is. Like, how if you don't have an external compass like the Bible, or in our case, we also would believe in a Holy Spirit. How do you think that through? How do you come to the place of moral compass?
The same way you do.
Okay.
Okay. The Bible is not an external force. The Bible is not an external source. It is an internal source that humans wrote. Mm-hmm. Humans wrote it and then said, God wrote this. Okay? So there's nothing divine in the Bible. There's nothing external in the Bible. There's nothing new in the Bible. This is stuff that people, men, many of whom were illiterate, wrote and then called it. Like I said, religion takes the credit for things that humans do, especially the good things, never the bad things. So when the Bible was written and it was given the credit of the God, it's put aside, it's put to the side, it's put above us. And that is a very dangerous thing, because that allows people to think of morality as objective. And folks, objective morality is a very dangerous thing. It's a very dangerous concept, because if you believe that anything that you do is perfectly right, beyond question, even when other people who view the same book don't think so, you're going to do things without thinking about the consequences. And this is why it's so important for us to realize that the Bible is man-made, that everything is relative, that morality is relative, that there is no outside lawgiver. We give our laws. Some preachers say the law that we made up, that homosexual people should not be able to adopt children, well, that comes from the Bible. Well, it also says in the same sentence that those people should be stoned to death. But we're not going to pay attention to that one because we don't like it. We do like this, so we're going to justify it with the Bible and call it morality.
So wait, you didn't answer the question, though. How do you make moral decisions personally?
The same way you do.
Which is your gut?
Yeah. It's all we all make those decisions. We all make those decisions. The only difference is that religious people will say, they'll make the decision, and then they will find a place in the Bible to support their decisions. And that is why the Ku Klux Klan burns crosses on people's lawns. Their hate is based in the Bible as far as they're concerned. It's the same thing. It's people taking their own morality, making their own moral judgments, placing the responsibility on the Bible, giving away their responsibility to make those judgments. I'm not a bigot. I'm doing God's work. Oh, all of a sudden, now I'm excused. That's why objective morality is dangerous.
Is it fair to say it's a little bit of a broad brush, right? As far as Christianity, but we throw in the KKK, and I see where you're going, but
they're not burning Jewish stars, okay?
Fair enough.
They're not burning Jewish stars. They're burning crosses. They're doing what they're doing,
right,
in the name of the same God that you pray to every day. And they're using the same Bible.
Right. And we veered a little bit off the reservation, and I think appropriately, this is helpful. We want to go back to the nature of this particular question, and that is to ask, okay, what are some of the misconceptions? I think we're going to have a chance to get on some of these in just a moment. And Anthony, you had something that you wanted to say, so I don't want to lose the spirit of it. We're still moving toward understanding. We just learned a little bit more about how you see.
Well, that's the point.
The Bible.
Yeah, you'll get it. You'll get it. The Atheist Convention is this weekend, so don't worry about it. Kathy looks itchy. You want to say something?
Oh, talking about morality and ethics, for me, if you just take the Bible completely off the table and just approach the world as a socialized, rational human being, all the ethics and morality we need most of the time are in the social contract that we have with each other. I'm a person. I want to be involved in society. I want people to treat me well. So that implies there's a social contract on my end where it's important to me to treat people like I want to be treated. And I know people are going to say that's the golden rule, but the Bible and Christianity does not hold a monopoly on those kinds of ideas. Those kinds of ideas have been with us a lot longer than 2,000 years. It's rational to accept the social contract and make that a basis for your ethics, for how you treat people.
Great. Okay. Anthony?
Well, I'll just add that there is an underlying basis to the idea of a social contract, which is that there are objective parameters. We do understand quite a lot about what makes people suffer and what helps people to flourish. So we know, for example, that we don't like to be tortured, we don't like to be hungry or cold, we don't like to be without companionship, without an opportunity to play, to develop our talents. This is why we can have regimes of human rights, because we understand the broad basis that gives people a chance to make lives that are good to live. And they provide a kind of objective constraint, or a set of guidelines, really, about the absolute basis of how we act towards one another. And those things are objective, and they do provide us with an orientation when we're thinking about the moral life.
So to answer the question, I'm rephrasing a little bit to hear what I'm hearing or rephrasing. You're saying that there is sort of a moral construct that comes from, Will, you called it the gut, but you would say that really it's from the basis of seeking to do good, what you perceive as good and right, et cetera. And so I think the difference is, David, you said it's the same way as you. That would be your perception. We would base everything that we're talking about on how we take the laws of logic and nature and physical laws that lead us to faith in God. And so God has a word, and we would build it off of that. Does that make sense? So our perception would be different from yours in that we would see that our morality comes from that. And I think it does help us see that you're coming from a moral construct. Is that
I'm not actually following you. Would you rephrase that, please? I don't quite understand what you're saying when you're saying
I'm disagreeing.
Contract,
a social contract. I apologize. I would say that we are basing our morality on a God that we believe in and His Word. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that you are.
Okay, that I am.
Yeah.
Right.
But where are you getting that? I mean, your God, and we're having a discussion here, so I'm going to push back at you. Your God's done a pretty broad array of things. And if you look in the Bible, you can find a very broad array of things. Again, Leviticus 20:13 is a very good example, okay? If a man lay with a man as he lay with a woman, he has committed an abomination unto the Lord, and he shall be stoned to death by the congregation. His blood is on his own hands. This is God talking to Moses on top of Mount Sinai. God's words. God commanded the death of all gay people. He also commanded the death of all blasphemers. So when you say that you base your morality on God, my question is, how do you decide the difference between the perfect word moral law and something that you're not really going to pay attention to because you know it's immoral?
It's a little bit of a misnomer to think that we would just not pay attention to those things.
Okay.
There's a contextual look at the Word of God that's a little bit longer than this conversation tonight. But I just wanted to establish, I think that we both have a moral contract, right? That's helpful. Okay. So now it's your turn to be on the hot seat. Who's going?
Okay,
With the primary, and just to rephrase the question, what do you sense the greatest misconception about your point of view, Christianity?
Well, I would say that I don't know. I'm not going to put words in y'all's mouth in that, but I sense there's a perception among non-believers that if one becomes a Christian, some becomes a believer in the one true God, expressed, in the flesh in Jesus, part of the triune Father, Son, Spirit, that what we do as Christians, we check our brains at the door.
Yep.
So we set aside all rationale. We're all about faith, and it's like a blind faith, a leap of faith. And what I would say is that's a misconception. We actually are very rational. In fact, even what you brought up, David, we would attempt to figure that out. Why is it's expressed that way? So that would be the misconception I would put forward, that we as Christians, we are all about faith for sure, but also about being rational, using our brains.
So the question then is that a valid assessment of how others see Christianity?
I would say that it's a valid assessment that, and Kathy might be about to jump on me about this, but I think that it is a valid assessment that Christians are thought of not as being dumb, not as being unintelligent, and not as having checked their brains at the door, but rather having compartmentalized their logic such that faith can still flourish despite evidence. It's not about intellect. The reputation that Christians have to atheists is not about brains. It's about victimhood. It's about the fact that Christians, or I should globalize this, believers, have been hurt by religion, have been brainwashed by religion, to compartmentalize their intellect and push it off to the side so that they can continue this traditional faith in which they were raised or in which they were indoctrinated.
Very interesting. Kathleen or Anthony?
Yeah, I can pounce in here. I've used the term, and believe me, I've known plenty of just super intelligent Christians, and I've never once thought somebody was less than intelligent because they were a Christian or whatever. But like he said, I've thought more than a few times that to be a believer in the face of science requires you to build compartments like he talked about. And in this one little compartment, you've got all this circular reasoning and mental gymnastics going on to try to make the universe make sense in context of religious faith. And it's actually a series of mental gymnastics I tried very hard to practice when I was growing up, because I was raised to be a Christian, and finally just had to give it up when I was 18 because I couldn't make sense out of pretty much any of it. So I wonder how it is people are able to do that, because I've never been able to do it, but I've never thought any Christian checked their brain at the door. Just builds compartments.
I appreciate you saying that. You guys said a minute ago that Christians the Bible doesn't hold the monopoly on good and morality and kindness, and I agree with that. But we hear a lot that atheists hold the monopoly on science and reason, and that is not true. I've got a lot of friends that are highly cerebral and well-trained scientists, et cetera, that also have a great, profound faith, some on highly known levels nationwide and internationally. They don't check their brains at the door. You're not accusing them of that. But they don't compartmentalize either. And we don't try to look at science and rationalize it from a religious standpoint. Science is what it is. Science is just fact. You look at it, in some cases it's theory, but we don't try to read it in light of Scripture. Science just says what it says. My job is to understand that and still let the realm of faith be faith. So I don't...
That's compartmentalization.
It really isn't, because in my world, they mingle quite nicely. I have no problem understanding that there's a scientific world that God created with laws in it. Where I get frustrated is when I get thrown in my face all the time. Well, you guys don't know anything about science. Well, there are plenty of scientists who also love Jesus. And I think they'd be ready to push back strongly that they're compartmentalizing their brains in doing so.
It's helpful to know that the perception is a little bit different than what we thought. So thank you. Is there another misconception you'd like to, or Anthony, would you like to say anything?
Yes, if I may, I'll join.
I'm finding this challenge of trying to move everything without interrupting constantly, so I apologize.
No, you're doing fine.
I'm going to go with my atheist colleagues here on the compartmentalization point, because I do think that there are some quite dramatic clashes between the worldviews that are involved, and those clashes can only be tolerated if there's a sort of Chinese wall between them. But I think the really important point is that one must distinguish between non-rational reasons for holding a belief, that is the absolute first premise of faith, from which very, very rigorous reasoning and the greatest refinement of logical thought might follow. I mean, if you think about some of the greatest thinkers in the tradition of Christian theology and philosophy, people like Aquinas and so on, one can't claim of them that they'd left their brains anywhere. But the starting point for them, that's really the interesting question. And the starting point arguably is a non-rational one. That doesn't follow that it's an irrational one, but it may have many, many different kinds of explanations. I mean, it's a staring fact that the great majority of believers of all faiths have the faith of their parents. Now, that says something. It also says something that people who may have lost their faith or neglected it may, in times of grief or strife or failure or difficulty, return to their faith, suggesting something of the great emotional power that faith has for people and the kind of psychological support that it provides. So historical and psychological reasons might play their part on that starting point, perhaps much more than reasons of reason.
And I feel like that is a very valid point to kind of work through and wrestle through. The question is, to me at times, is that always the determining factor? And interestingly enough, even in kind of our social media, getting the word out that we were doing this in Austin, the number of people that responded back to me and says, I'm glad you guys are meeting together to have this discussion. I was an atheist, and now I've come to faith. So there are people that actually their starting point is a completely a naturalistic explanation raised in a secular environment who do make that transition. And personally, that was kind of me, because I went the other way. I grew up in a really strict fundamentalist background, and everything that you guys would stereotype and say, this is the worst of the worst of the worst in American Christianity. That's what I grew up in. Completely rejected it, went to college, and did my best to try to find a way to disprove Christianity. And what I landed on was a different view of the Bible because of the objective background of looking at the archaeology, the history, the reasonability of the things that were taking place there, and actually went into 8 years of higher education to study and find out if this could be true or not. So I kind of came at it from the other direction of trying to start with the premise that it isn't true, and was convinced going the other way. So I do believe that that's a really valid point, that if people are following an idea that was simply placed there by their environment, that's challenging. That's really challenging, and it does happen. And I think people that are good atheists probably convert to atheism. People that are good Christians probably convert to Christianity. They don't just simply grow up in it.
Interesting. So,
Go ahead. Now, you're about to move on to the next question.
I was
aren't you?
going to, but if you're chomping at the bit to say something, go
Well,
ahead.
the next question that you're going to ask is what is the burning question that you want to ask Christians, right?
I was going to go back and just see if there were any more misconceptions you wanted to cover.
I want to ask the burning question. I want to ask the burning question. Any more misconceptions?
Wonder which one David
there
wants
is
to
one
ask
more,
next.
There is one more misconception that I'd
Okay.
like to address, and that is that atheists are all the same. Okay. I'm
Different ways there are Christians.
A lot of people assume that atheists are all liberal. A lot of people assume we're all grumpy.
It's just 1 out of 3 so far today.
I haven't had my beer yet.
Hey,
It's sitting
that was
there
a low blow.
taunting us.
It's
right?
7-second
for
delay,
me.
please.
No, one of the problems, it's not a problem, but one of the things that we have seen in atheism as an issue is our own diversity. Because we're going to have 800 or so, 900 or so atheists here this weekend, and we're going to have Republicans and Democrats. We're going to have pro-choice and anti-abortion. We're going to have left, right, rich, poor, black, white, Hispanic. It's very, very broad, and it's kind of ironic because our diversity is kind of one of the problems of the movement, because we all have so many different avenues. And then when we hear, well, you're an atheist, so you're a liberal, you're pro-choice, you're pro-gay rights. Well, we're pretty much mostly pro-gay rights. But that when they clump us together beyond atheism, it's really something that's woefully incorrect. Woefully incorrect.
Interesting.
So can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
At the risk of taking a very pleasant evening and making it much sour, I'm not sure that you guys will represent atheism at all. The American Atheist Association. Yeah, how about that for really left field?
Hey, you should hear him preach.
I think I'll pass.
Sunday is Easter, by the way. You're welcome to come. Let me explain that. There are, I'm not sure the number is completely accurate, but there are, according to Pew, 15 million self-professing atheists in America.
Closer to 20, but yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Well, from the statesman source, if the numbers are wrong, please tell me, the membership of your organization is about 3,000 to 4,000.
Right.
So that tells me a lot.
Yes.
That tells me that a lot of the atheists do not identify with what you guys are about. And that while they may share your struggle with the concept of the divine, which I understand, they've not signed up for a reason. And most of the atheists I know and consider friends don't view it as a badge of honor and don't view it as this militant thing thumping their chest, I'm an atheist, deal with it. They struggle with it. They're broken over it. Many of them very much wish to believe in God but can't find the rationale to do so, or the experience has told them, if that's God, I don't want anything to do with him. But they don't have this axe to grind that your movement appears to have. So I'm not convinced, 3,000, 4,000 members in 50 years, as opposed to 20 million, 15 million atheists in the country, that doesn't sound very well supported by your group to me, personally, or well representative, in all honesty.
May I suggest a reason why that's so?
Please.
It's because atheists tend to think for themselves. They tend not to be joiners. And one rather significant fact about atheism is that it's a position of not believing something. I mean, I often say to people that I would actually rather be described as an atheist than an atheist, because that moves the debate onto ground where things are much clearer. Why don't I think there are fairies? And I can talk about the evidence and so on. And by the way, it's not a trivial point, this, because people have forgotten the fact that belief in fairies was very, very widespread, and there's a great deal of folklore about fairies and quite a lot of writing about it. And people right up to the late 19th, early 20th century in my own country thought that if the milk curdled or their shoelaces went missing, it was because of the little people. There was a very widespread belief in it. And there was a discussion about it. What are the grounds for belief? People were taking photographs of them, you may remember. It's not a trivial point, this one. So I say to people, call me an atheist, and then we can have a discussion about why I'm so. The really crucial point here is that to be an atheist, and by the way, atheist is a theist's word for people who don't agree with them, the relationship between atheism and theism is the same as the relationship between people who don't collect stamps and those who do. Atheists are the people who don't collect stamps. This is why it's very difficult to be a militant atheist, because it's very difficult to be a militant non-stamp collector. If you think about trying to really not collect stamps as hard as you can go. So So when the specter of militancy comes up, it's actually not about atheism. It's about secularism. It's about the relationship between the religious voice and public policy matters. It's about the place of the religious voice in the public square. That's where militancy and the ferocity of argument comes in. This is where, for example, my late lamented friend Hitch was very active. Hitch used to describe himself as an anti-theist, not as an atheist. Well, he was an atheist, but he was much more concerned with the argument, trying to push back against people who wanted the influence of religion to be much greater in the public square. And the secularism issue is different from the atheism issue because there are some religious secularists. In fact, secularism began in medieval times, and it was begun by the church, who didn't want the temporal powers to control the church or to interfere in church matters. And so it's possible to be a militant religious secularist, but it really isn't possible to be a militant atheist. I mean, if you were a moderate atheist, what would that mean? Would you believe in a part of a God? Or would you believe that God exists just on Sundays? I think a lot of Christians do think that, don't they? So it really is important to get these names right.
Thank you, sir.
I feel if I'm going to be the moderator, then I need to not ask questions, but this is a point of clarity, not a loaded question, because you did state that there's a number of those coming to this conference who come from all sorts of backgrounds. David, what is the rallying point, do you feel like, that causes them to say, I'm going to buy a ticket and come to Austin? So there is some common denominator to the American atheists.
Yeah, there absolutely is, because, and this is a very important thing that you have to understand. It's not about the millions of people who are not joining American Atheists. You don't have to join an organization in order to be an atheist. American Atheists is not about being an atheist. It's about equality. Okay, it's about the separation of church and state. It's about freedom to be us and freedom to be fully equal in this country. So that's what we do. We don't just get together in a great big room and say, hey, I don't believe in God. Well, I don't either. Well, hey, how about you? No, I don't believe in God either. That's not what it's about. It's about making sure that we're known in Washington and in Austin, making sure that we're known in every corner of every state, trying to stamp out bigotry against us. Right now, atheists in America are the least trusted minority in the country. We have to fix that. That's a problem that we have to address. And so that's what we get into when we're talking about Christian privilege, when we're talking about the inherent disadvantage of not being a believer in America. That's what gets us here.
Okay. Let me ask one other. Go ahead. Just to make sure that we covered that for the other side, is that a valid assessment, this perception that all atheists are the same, this broad brush? Is that a valid assessment, maybe not of this panel, but of the general Christian population?
I do think that I think that Will did a good job of kind of delineating, and Anthony, I think you probably explained really well why the differentiation. I would say that the people that would be more public in criticizing religion for the purpose of social change probably have a monolithic perception of that group of people, that they're angry, that they're hurt, that they're disenfranchised, and they're lashing out. And then there's a large group of people who just don't know what they believe. And they would land in the atheist agnostic point of view because they've not landed, and those people are the ones who aren't joining. They're not. Those people will tend to have dialogue with us, conversation with us, where they will give a point and then they'll take a point, and they'll give a point and they'll take a point, and they'll say, I think you guys are crazy on this one. I think that makes sense to us. And so that I think it's fair that what you're saying, that perception exists, particularly for those people who are a little bit more vocal or agenda driven.
Yeah, and I would add this. In the same way, you're stating that's a misconception about atheists. We would say as Christians that is exactly true of us as well, that not all Christians think alike. And I mean, obviously on absolutes, we would hopefully agree on absolutes. But then we talk about convictions. Those differ. Preferences differ. Opinions differ. And so one of the responses that might be a little unsettling sometimes is there might be a feeling from an atheist community or a more politicized atheist community that Christians are being made to be the very same. So if there was a Christian who ever hated somebody, all Christians hate. If there was a Christian that had some bizarre, tiny little belief systems, well, that's the way all Christians think. So I appreciate you making the comment about an atheist position, and I appreciate that you're saying you're not all alike.
It's helpful.
It's very helpful.
Very good.
Okay. Kathleen?
I just want to say, you guys know there are folks on your side that do not help our perception of you and of Christianity at all.
Yes.
So
They go to our churches.
Because for every gentleman I meet like this, there's 100 emails in my email box telling me I'm going to burn in hell. And there's the commanders who harassed me for the whole 22 years that I was in the service. And there's the little Girl Scout troop an hour north of here, right up the road, that won't let my little stepdaughter join the neighborhood Girl Scout troop because her dad and her stepmom are atheists, and because I'm a part of this organization. Those are the people that we hear from. We don't hardly ever hear from folks like you. We hear from them.
I agree.
Can I'm just going to take it on myself. I'm not the Pope, but I'm going to take it on myself to just apologize from Jesus Christ, because there's nothing in his ministry that you would see that would act like that toward people. That's just not. So we affirm you as a human being. We completely believe in your right to not believe, and we laud you for your commitment to the community, for serving our nation, and we're neighbors. So.
And would you say on the record in front of everybody that the Girl Scout troop an hour north of here should take Kathy's stepdaughter in, even though she's an atheist? Would you say that right now?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know why not. I also told these guys don't say anything that's real inflammatory, because I don't want anybody picketing my church on Easter Sunday.
That's Tim Hawks, Hill Country Bible Church. Send all cards and letters to HAWKS, Hawks.
The American Atheist National Convention Sunday activity will be
That's right.
At Bannockburn Baptist Church.
That's right.
7100 Brody Lane.
So let me just say this. I completely agree that the church in history, when it became politicized, those are the worst moments forever in the history of the church. And personally, I get pressure every day from people to politicize our church. If we could just get your 6,000 people to vote our way, we could take over the city, and we resist that every day, because we don't believe that that's the purpose of the church.
Thank you.
And so we don't do that.
Ryan? Yes.
I would say that if I were to say that the number one, well, I shouldn't say the number one, because there are so many sometimes, but one of the big stereotypes that atheists have of Christians is that, and it's not just Christians, it's Muslims too, you are trying to make us act like you. Okay, and that's what...
We don't act like us, but we don't act like us.
Well, we know that.
I mean, we don't.
We know that.
We can't get you to do it. We can't do it.
But that's
David,
something
go ahead.
but let's talk about the separation of church and state a little bit, because we have a big problem in this country. Right now here in Texas, the textbooks have been rewritten to take out Thomas Jefferson and put in a more of a religious influence. We're seeing In God We Trust and the money, One Nation Under God and the pledge, and of course the whole gay marriage thing, which is a complete separation of church and state issue. Zero sum. I mean, there's no way to argue around it. It's a separation of church and state issue. So I would like you to address the Christian version of politicking. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I do not believe Christians in Muslim countries like it when the Muslims pass Sharia laws and make the Christians observe. I would like to hear some comments from you on the Christians who are trying to pass laws and continuing to support laws in this country for the sole purpose of making non-Christians act like Christians.
So, David, for the sake of time, can I ask this? Go ahead and applaud him. Feel free. I did not mean to cut off the applause. That was a worthy place for applause. There's a difference between the church being involved in politics, in other words, mandating how those would vote, and Christians who are part of those churches being involved in politics, who would have just as much right in a representative government as atheists being involved in politics. So we're fair on that, right? You don't have
We're
a problem
fair
with
about individuals doing that, yes, but what I'm talking about is placing Christian law, as it is interpreted by today's Christians, above the Constitution, and actually saying, okay, it's more important for you to, it's more important for other people's children to have prayer in school so that they're exposed to my religion.
Right.
You know, that kind of thing. It's about making other people, non-Christians, obey specifically Christian rules. How is that Christian?
We're pretty far down the road from the prayer in school argument right now anyway, right?
Yeah, but it's still valid. It's still live.
So the question I would have, take off my moderator hat.
In Mississippi, it just passed. The governor just signed into law that they're going to have prayers in the schools. Why are you going to do that if the kids who are there now, every child in every school in America can pray anytime they want to? So the only people who aren't praying in schools are the people who don't want to. So
Can I try to address it?
Yeah.
I am in the category with my friend Tim over here. I get asked to lobby all the time and to endorse candidates, and I will not do it. That's not the mission I have as a Christ follower or as a pastor to engage in political activity. I don't have time, number one. Number two, it's not my job. Number three, I will lose relationships with guys like you if I do. So I'd rather have the relationships. But I understand where the folks are coming from. The separation of church and state interpretation, if you look at the history of this country, including the colonial days, pre-Revolutionary War, is a relatively new Supreme Court understanding of the Constitution, First Amendment. I don't have any delusions at all, or illusions that our forefathers created our country in some kind of spiritual vacuum, that they believed religion or a belief in God would have no part in our culture. If you read their writings, some were Christians, some were deists, but they were pretty sure that you can't govern in democracy without a God-fearing, God-in-awe people. That cannot work. And so the "In God We Trust" didn't just happen. I mean, that was the mindset of our original fathers, like it or not, right or wrong, was this
Wrong.
had to be, well,
1954.
Let's read their
1954, In God We Trust.
Okay, well, let's take "In God We Trust" off the table. How about just the whole, this is a country founded on the belief that there is a God and we can't govern without him. That's what the guy said over and over and over again, okay?
Nevertheless, we
It's there.
agree.
Well, let me finish.
Okay.
Let me finish.
But-
So people who see that being taken away feel like we risk losing something this country was meant to be. I'm not lobbying in the camp, but I understand where they're coming from. They fear that this country was intended to at least have a respect for deity, and that we
By
didn't. we weren't-
force.
No, not by force. That's why they wrote the First Amendment. It's not by force at all.
That's what I was going to say, David. We can certainly agree that the concern over the separation would at least be one-sided, that we didn't have another Britain where people were mandated to worship, which would be counterintuitive to everything that we believe anyway. And so that would be the greatest fear on both of our sides, that we don't want that. Correct? So my question would be, if we can be involved in the public arena, but it's not mandated by the church, that would be okay. So it's not a matter of atheists saying, we want you all to go out of the public arena so we can have it to ourselves.
No, actually, you both really avoided the question. And I'm going to push back on you both. I'm talking about the morality. I'm talking about the hypocrisy of breaking breaking the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In Muslim countries, Christians do not like being forced to acknowledge Allah, to being made to feel like outsiders in those countries, or being forced to obey those rules, sending their kids to schools and being forced to have those kids exposed to Islam. You wouldn't like that. You don't like that. I'm asking about the morality of the hypocrisy of saying, I wouldn't want that done to me, but I'm going to do it to you. Not on the church basis, but on an individual Christian basis.
Yeah, let me respond, David. So I think all of us would say no one should be forced to embrace something that they don't willfully say that's what I want. And so we could have a long debate about whether kids should be forced to pray in a school. I can't imagine forcing kids to pray. They just, as a Christian pastor, I just go, I don't get that. That's kind of bizarre to me. But the question I would have of you would be this. Do you believe that you can influence public policy without bringing your morality? And my question, and I'll give that to you, I think it's difficult for you to ask a believer, a Christian in this case, to separate our morality and the basis of our morality from the public forum. It's a difficult thing to do. So, for example, if we talk about some of the major social issues of our day, abortion, pro-life, gay marriage, things like that, it's very difficult for us to set our moorings aside. And my challenge, I just to challenge you and ask you, do you think you set your moorings aside in the public forum, in the public arena?
Of course not. But
Okay.
I don't push my atheism. There's nothing in anything that I would vote for that would be a pro-atheist stance. Okay? When you're talking about gay marriage, when you're talking about abortion, when you're talking about prayer in school, you're talking about making other people obey your religious rules. I don't know of any instance, I can't even imagine one, frankly, except to say, okay, we're going to change the Pledge of Allegiance to one nation under no God.
Yeah, right.
That would be a pro-atheist thing. Yeah. That's not what we do. What we do is we push neutrality. And that's fair to everybody. That is something that I can say obeys the golden rule. Everything that I push, neutrality, fairness, equality, I would have pushed onto me.
Okay.
And I do not see that as the reverse being true.
Can I follow? So let me follow up. Just to understand, this might be one of those misconceptions again. So can you imagine potentially how a Christian might feel when your push is towards neutrality, that the Christian might feel that it's a push towards secularism altogether, so that again, not laying aside our moorings, our values, when we see the atheists say, no, let's take out that Christian value, as it were, and I won't even say like a restriction, but a Christian value, and put in its place neutrality.
Yeah.
So my point is, can you see how we might sense at least that that it's being taken out altogether?
Oh, I certainly see it.
Yeah.
Oh, I certainly see it. I'm just pointing out it's a lot like the men complaining that they were losing their privilege when women got the vote. Okay, it's a lot like the white people saying, "Oh, we're blackening America because we're segregating the schools. I'm losing my white privilege because we're allowing black people into the schools."
Sure.
Privilege isn't right.
Right.
Privilege isn't equality. Privilege isn't fair. And I understand. I absolutely. As a white guy, I understand privilege, or at least I think I do. Mm-hmm. So I totally understand why people think they're losing something. They are. There's no doubt they are. We are fighting to take that away because we think it's wrong to be there in the first place.
Okay. Let the record show I gave David Silverman the last word on that issue. Anthony has been waiting patiently to say something.
Well, just a very quick point about why secularism is so important even for people of religion. Because every denomination, every sect, and the different religions represented in this great country is in a minority. And it's terribly important that nobody should be in a position to assert things that might be detrimental to one or another minority. I know everybody here was reading John Stuart Mill in the bath last night, so they'll remember what he says in his great essay on liberty, that the most important protector of liberty is that we should protect minorities and minority interests. And it's easy to forget when we talk about Christians, capital C and plural, but actually I think I'm right in saying there are about 20,000 different denominations or churches in the United States of America. So there can't be any one of them which has a majority of the population. Therefore, no one of them could possibly want any other one of them to have more of a say than they do themselves. So secularism protects everybody. That's the neutrality point.
Interesting. Are we ready to move to the next question?
The second question?
The second question. As those who are standing in the back groan. There's no rule, is there, David? We don't have any rules.
There's no objective rule.
There's no objective rule that says we have to get to question 3.
We all make our decisions on our own.
In this room tonight. Next question. What is the question that atheists most want to ask Christians and get an honest answer? Recognizing that we've already sort of delved into this, right?
Well, I have one. And this is the, we were talking about this, and Tim, I'm going to call on you specifically. You said you were raised Christian, and then you went secular for a while, and then you investigated it, and you ended up Christian. You have not addressed the big point that Anthony addressed, which is that people stay in the religion in which they're born. So I would like to address this question to you. Given the fact that the huge majority of people, God bless you.
I knew somebody was going to say it. I was just waiting for it. I knew somebody was going to say it.
I'd like to pause for just a moment to mark this spot on the tape.
You can't have a sense of humor. What are you doing if you can't have a sense of humor? Now, so let's talk about this just for a second. And this is the question that I really would like Christians to just answer. Most of you were born to Christian parents. The most fundamental of you were born and raised in church. Maybe you've changed denominations of Christianity. Maybe you've gone one way or the other, back and forth. But most of you, by leaps and bounds, are in the religion in which you were born. If you were born in another country, you would be absolutely sure that Allah was the one true God and Muhammad was his only prophet. So my question to you is this. Given the fact that you've obviously been raised in a Christian household, given the fact that so many people stay in the religion in which they were raised, how can you think you're right?
That's an absolutely wonderful question, and that's one of the reasons why Christianity differentiates itself from every other major religion, because Christianity actually says at a place in history, in a public setting, an individual claimed to be God. That a group of people observed this. They watched his life. There is recording of that. There's corollary witnesses that are actually outside of the group that wrote about it, and that something happened there, and that's what Christianity is based on. In the interaction we have with people from Islamic backgrounds, they will say that the prophet received personally the words of God and wrote them down, and that act right there means that everything that's written is true. It doesn't have a sense of historical viability. It's not recording events that happened. It's not based on being able to go back and say, what do we use to know that Abraham Lincoln lived, that he wrote things? I mean, what's the evidence of that? What do we know about Plato? That when we're reading his writings, that came from a real person. We use a whole bunch of historical facts and inferences to try to validate, did that actually happen? So the Vedas that describe ideas and stories that are mythic in nature are very different than what the Bible actually claims. So you can say that you don't believe anything in the Bible, it was all fabricated and made up, but at least the Bible itself claims that real events happened in history and real things happened. People observed those and recorded those things. So the question for me was, do I believe on the basis of how I know what happened in the past, is there enough evidence to support that this was actually true? And then can I take that and apply it to how humans think, how people socially interact, a reading of history, a reading of philosophy, and build a comprehensive view? For me personally, I came to a point where there are lots of things about the teachings of the Bible that I personally don't like. I don't like those things. But the historical consistency by which I believe anything from history validates itself for me in the Bible. And so therefore, I mean, I'd have to say, for me personally, I'd have to say I don't know anything about history, about the past. If I took what I did to apply to the Bible, if I took that away, I wouldn't know anything. I couldn't know anything. I would think that, the dialogues of Plato were made up by somebody somewhere along the way, and there wasn't a real person. There wasn't anything in history that's real. So, that's where I land. And of course, obviously you can disagree with that, but that's me.
Well, if I may, Tim. You've made a study of these things. You described earlier spending a number of years in higher education thinking about these things. And therefore you'll be conscious of the fact that history is victors' history. It's not written by the people who lost out. It's written by the people who triumphed. But even despite the fact that the documents which in about the 3rd or 4th century of the Christian era were chosen to be the ones that represented the then most dominant Orthodox view of Christianity, and there'd been many different versions of Christianity, many other documents, many other Gospels, and so on, which were regarded as non-canonical. Even though by that point the church had become dominant enough to be able to select which records it would keep and which it would not keep, there still survived and has survived, and we know a good deal about it. All the other messiahs, all the other people who led movements against the Roman occupation of Palestine, all the other promises that were made were people who were believed in. And it's very easy to forget, it's certainly very easy to forget for people now, that for several centuries after the events in Palestine that are associated with the ministry of Jesus, that there was no Christian church other than a very minority-run church which recommended itself to slaves, to women, to people who were oppressed, because it said to them, you can become gods like Hercules. You can get to Olympus if you will only have faith, and you will inherit. It doesn't matter if you're poor and you suffer now, you'll be okay. It's a very attractive message for people. People also forget that for several centuries, Christians were Jews. They really did think in Jewish terms about death and about resurrection. For example, Paul tells us that when you die, you're buried, and when the last trump sounds, the graves will open and you will come out with a new body. There's one thing about St. Paul I find attractive, because I'd like a nice six-pack when I'm resurrected. But it was and this was something along with the ethics of the New Testament, because you just look at the epistles of Paul and the 4 canonical Gospels. What does it tell you how to live your life? It says, give away everything you've got. It says, take no thought for tomorrow. Consider the lilies of the field. It says, don't marry. It says, if your family disagree with you, and they will if you give everything away, you turn your back on them. And this was the very sincere outlook of people who thought that the Messiah was going to come back soon. Next week, next month, maybe next year, but very, very soon. That's why you've got to keep the wicks of your lamps trimmed. Now, 300 years, 200, 300, 400 years went by, and the church needed something a bit more than that, because people needed a morality to guide them. Where did they get it from? They got it from the much more ancient, much richer, much deeper ethical thinking of the great Greek schools, the Stoics and the Aristotelians. And where did they get their metaphysics about an immortal soul? They got it from Neoplatonism. It wasn't the Christian church in its first centuries, but the philosophy of Plato that believed in an immortal soul. So an immense amount of material was imported into Christianity several centuries on into the story, which is what people now think of as Christianity. And it didn't used to be like that. So and also, the great panoply there were lots of messianic movements in the Palestine of that day. One of those stories has survived. And if I may tell you a very quick anecdote. When I was at school, I went to a British-style boarding school, and we had to go to chapel every day, which is why nobody paid any attention. So it was a surprise to me one day when we had a new chaplain, and he uttered a prayer in which he used the word inspiration, but he pronounced it in an interesting way. He pronounced it inspiration. Now, I'd just been reading about the Greek poets, the ancient Greek poets, and how the muses would breathe in the poetry to their ear. The genius was a little thing that sat on your shoulder and whispered into your ear. So I went up to him and I said, having been brought up in an entirely non-religious household, so I'd always been very surprised by what people believed. I went up to him and I said, this Christianity business, you've got to give me something to read. I was an earnest youth and I liked to study. He said, you must read the Epistle to the Romans, the great converting epistle. You must read Bishop Robinson's Honest to God. That's a forgotten book now, I suppose, but it was an attempt in the 1960s to explain religion to non-religious people. You've got to read Dostoevsky. This was an imaginative thing he suggested, because Dostoevsky has a very interesting take on these matters. So I took them away and I studied them, and I went back to him and I said, at the end of a school holiday, I said to him, I've read this stuff and I've got a question to ask you. My question is, how can you believe this stuff? And he said an interesting thing. He said, every morning when I wake up, I pray, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. And I said to him, so you don't believe it either. The point is that I said to him, what surprised me about it was, I said, look, here's a story. The story is God makes a mortal maiden pregnant, and she gives birth to an extraordinary figure, does various things, goes to the underworld, comes out, and he joins his father afterwards. I said, that story is told over and over and over again in mythology. Zeus was always making mortal maidens pregnant. He had a hell of a good time. They gave birth to all sorts of heroic figures, Hercules and others, who went to the underworld and came out and joined their father on Olympus. Why is this story true? Why do you believe this one? And now you've just claimed that the record, the historical record, is convincing. But put into context of the fact that it is one strand of the historical story which has been kept going, kept alive. The documents have been kept going because it succeeded politically and in temporal terms and became very powerful and influential socially, while all the other ones dropped away. Why is that a reason for believing it, once we know the full facts and we can look back on it dispassionately?
Yep. And I guess my response to that would be that there have been people that are not positive about Christianity. The big debate at the turn of the 20th century was the search for the historical Jesus, because the naysayers about that assumed a priori that Jesus did not ever really exist, that this whole thing was made up, it was a fable. I don't know very many people that hold to that at a scholarly level anymore, but that was the university's mentality. That was the intelligentsia of the secular thinkers at that time. And so, I mean, that's why I went back and looked at the apocryphal books. I looked at the pseudepigrapha. I read those things. I looked at what the church wrote. I looked at what people that disagreed at that time wrote. The other thing that is really helpful to me is the statement. I completely agree with you that history is written by the victors, and that's why the Bible is unique in history, because the history describes the demise of the Jewish people, with one king after another that disobeyed their God, lost battles, were defeated until they were carried away into captivity. It describes the leaders throughout as being flawed people, which when you read ancient Egyptian texts, the pharaohs are always perfect. You read the ancient Roman texts, they do the best they can to try to present their leaders as great, and the Jewish text in the Old Testament just doesn't do that. So there are some significant uniquenesses about the literature of the Bible, and then just a whole lot, but even with all of the civilizations that have been built in the Holy Land, a whole lot of evidence that what we're reading there is historically reliable.
Well, Tim, maybe the Old Testament is a Jewish joke.
Okay.
Sorry, I mean in the sense that instead of praising the kings, it always had a go at them. I mean that the critical mindset which is associated with the great contribution that the Jewish peoples have made to science and to art and to music and so on is exemplified there too, in the sense that it's historically very, very keen to try to get the facts out and explain them. But the way they do it, of course, is naturally in line with a particular interpretation about the activity of the deity in history. And it would be very easy for us in the UK or people in the United States, for example, to write about British or American history in light of its failures to respond to God's desires.
Right. Well, and that's why I majored in Hebrew and Semitics, because I wanted to really understand the Jewish culture and background. So anyway, to answer your question, if I perceived, when I was going through my struggle with all this, if I perceived that there was any possibility that this was a fable in my mind, I would have jumped at the opportunity. I landed at a place where I felt like I just can't do anything else, because every avenue I travel, I run into verifiable truth.
Kathleen, did you want to say something?
Sure. For one thing, I gotta say, I could listen to this man talk all day. He could read the phone book, and I would sit here with rapt attention. His voice is amazing. I'm like, wow, that's really something. I just had to get that off my chest. Anyway, I'm absolutely no scholar. I'm no archaeologist. I'm no historian. But when people start talking about biblical history, biblical archaeology, it makes me think, okay, well, the Civil War really happened, but Gone with the Wind is not a true story. Portions being proved true do not validate the whole. But if you assume for a minute that this person, Jesus, was a real person, and that the history and the archaeology shows that this person is a real person, it is a huge jump to go from believing there was a person named Jesus who went around telling people he was the Son of God, to going to the point to saying history and archaeology proves he really was the Son of God. Huge, huge, huge difference. And that's something we talk about, asking questions I've always wanted answered. I don't see how it's possible to say history and archaeology prove the divinity of Jesus. I don't see how that's possible at all, but people use that
We would
argument all the
agree with
time.
you on that.
Yeah.
We would absolutely agree with you on that. You cannot prove God exists. You can't prove that. At some point, faith is going to kick in. The point that history and archaeology help with is giving some credibility to Scripture. That's all. Yeah. It's not in a vacuum. It's not the golden tablets of Moroni dropped down from heaven. It mentions real places, real times, real kings, real leaders. It sets context. Yeah. Right. You cannot prove anyway through science or others that Christ is divine. That at some point there's evidence for it. We believe there's a lot of evidence for it, but it's not something you can put in a lab and test tube and prove.
It's not irrational.
Yeah. Rob?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to David's question as well. And Anthony, I'm just going to say I love your way as well. Wow. I wish you were on our team, actually.
You can't have him.
Yes. This is really great, and David, I appreciate your question. I wouldn't answer it exactly the way you asked it because really the burden of proof is not whether I believe I'm right or not. That's not why I'm a Christian, whether I'm right or not. So for me, even on a philosophical level, to have a system that I think works, that's acceptable, it's got to have correspondence to reality, but also it has to have coherence. So it's got to correspond to what, in fact, historically is recorded. What is the things that really did happen? What's reality? And then secondly, in my view, it had to have internal coherence. So the issue became for me, it was what is the evidence? And when we come to Jesus, obviously we're not saying that historical and geographical and all that sort of thing proves that he's the Son of God, but he made some unbelievable claims. He said he was God. I mean, whoa. I mean, if anybody stands up and says they're God now, we're gonna go, whoa, really? I mean, it's bizarre that someone would say that. So he made the claim, and as far as I can tell, he backed the claim with power, demonstrations of power. But even more than that, his nature, his character, his humility. I mean, it's like it doesn't quite go together for just a regular kind of guy. And for us, obviously, this is Holy Week for us, and you've heard this said. I mean, how does a person say that he's going to rise again on the third day, and he fulfills that promise, and over 500 people see him? So you'd have to, and you know all the.
But that story comes straight from the Bible. The Bible says that's true.
Yes,
my
yes,
question.
right.
Okay, so you can't support your belief in the Bible by saying the Bible says it's true. That's not fair.
Fair enough. I hear what you're saying, but what I'm saying is the historical legal method is that eyewitnesses saw him. So all I'm saying is this, in fairness, I believe the evidence. And if you don't believe the evidence, that's okay. That's okay with me. But I believe it. You asked me how I became a Christian. My dad wasn't a Christian. I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I read the evidence and began to say, there's something to this. So I would say to you, when you look at Jesus, I think you have to make a decision. And you did. You so far have made a decision that you don't buy the stuff. I do. I believe it.
But. Go ahead. But we're avoiding the point. There are thousands of religions in this world. Thousands of them. All of them have adherents. All of those adherents think it's absolutely true, whatever religion it is. We're not just talking about Islam and Judaism and Christianity. Mm-hmm. There's thousands of them. They all have adherents. They all have books. They all have places in their books that are true. They all say nice things. Right. Now you can find any religion and find wisdom. You can look at any religion and find nice things, and you can certainly look at any religion and find people who claim divinity. And you can look at any religion and say that miracles happened because it's written in that book of divinity. Mm-hmm. So my question is, given the fact, you're looking at it from a Christian perspective. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at it from an atheist perspective. And from an atheist perspective, Christianity is not special. It's one of thousands.
Okay.
So my question is, okay, if you like yours, but there are thousands of other religions, millions, nay, billions of adherents of other religions who are sure they're right. And they all have their justifications. And they're going to look at you the same way I'm going to look at you and say, you're not giving me any justification. You're justifying your belief with what your Bible says. That doesn't make any sense. My religion is special because of something that's not so special. So my question to you is, why Christianity, given the fact that if you were, I think it's fair to say that if you were born in a different area of the world, you wouldn't be Christian because so many people stay with the religion in which they're born.
Yeah, David, I'd challenge that.
Go ahead.
In this way, there's 100 million Christians in China today. 100 million, okay? How do you explain that? My point is...
I can explain that.
There are Christians, because people went and talked to them, and they... Right. So my point is this. My point
Proselytization works.
Yes. My point is this. For me, I'll just speak for me, Christianity is different from every other religion in the world. It is not like any other. It's the only religion that says it's God came to earth and did for me what I couldn't do for myself. And obviously, I'm telling you that I believe I was born a sinner. I was separated from God. I needed a Savior. And God did for me what I couldn't do for myself. That's incredibly unique. So C.S. Lewis said it this way. He says, there's Christianity in every other religion. So all I'm saying in this discussion, if I were a Buddhist or a Muslim, I might be saying something different to you. But I'm saying as a Christian, and I think my friends who are Buddhist and Muslim would agree with me, that Christianity teaches some things that's incredibly unique from the things they believe. That's all I'm saying.
Moving toward, I'm going to ask one last question, so I'm going to hijack the panel and then give you the last word, as I promised David, Kathleen, Anthony, as you see fit. But I want to honor your time as well. I know you have a convention to keep, right? So I'm having
a great time though, Ryan. I think this is fun. Isn't this fun?
It is.
I spend so much time yelling. I spend so much of my time behind a microphone yelling at Christians, mostly Christians. Every once in a while somebody else, but mostly Christians. And this is really a refreshing change of pace. So really, this is a wonderful event. I'm really glad you organized it. Thank you so much.
Honored to be here. Honored that you're here, and I hope that we can do this again.
Sure.
So,
not before a convention, though. No, another time.
So to my point, I want to turn that question. So we won't. I know you guys had some great questions you wanted to ask related to the honest answer, but let's just take that same one. Could it be fair to turn that on its head and say there are thousands of religions in the world? I will borrow the statistic. You can validate or invalidate. 9 out of 10 citizens of the world today believe in a deity. Mm-hmm. Is that fair?
Yes.
So if 9 out of 10 from all sorts of cultures and backgrounds in the world believe this, I'm curious to know, is there any point, what would be the litmus test for any three of you where you would say, okay, I believe? Is there anything that would change your mind?
Well, sure. A miracle, a serious head-on miracle. Something that most Christians would say can never happen because then I would lose my free will. And then they say, oh, but I saw God himself. He showed himself to me, so I don't have free will. But they don't even go into that. But the true answer to your question is absolutely. You know, I want you all to understand, first of all, I want to live forever. I do. I want my daughter to live forever. And I want my mom, who died a few months ago, to be up in heaven looking down on me smiling. I want that more or as much than every single person in this room. It's not true. It's not real. I want the World Trade Center to stand. I want there to be no hunger. I want that. But it's not true. So what would get me to believe? Well, there would have to be some serious miracles occurred, not some natural phenomenon or some unexplained phenomenon that somebody says, I don't understand it, therefore God did it. You know, the tide goes in, the tide goes out kind of shit. Stuff. But I'm talking about, oh, look, there's a new planet in the sky. I'm talking about, you know, let's have a day where we wake up and there's no more cancer. I mean, here's the question that I'm going to answer your question with, okay? And it's a rhetorical question. If I woke up, or if you woke up, or if any of you woke up in the morning and you realized you were all powerful, how many nanoseconds would it take for you to decide starvation was bad and should end? How many nanoseconds would it take for you to decide that disease should go away? And you can do it. Boom. I would get up, I would rub my eyes, and certainly, before I had breakfast, this would be a very different place. That's what it would take.
Okay. Kathleen?
What he said. That's all I got. I can't say it better than he did. It would take. I can't even imagine what it would take, because, like I said, I spent most of my formative years trying to be a believer and train myself in what I called mental gymnastics and try to make myself, and whatever combination of genetics and socialization and other factors that it takes to have faith. Whatever that is, I have never had it, apparently, and a lot of people have never had. But I'll tell you, if a planet suddenly appeared in the sky with a guy who came down with a scepter and said, I'm going to wipe out cancer, and it really went away, okay, you got me. I'm a believer. I'll take it.
Okay.
Well, I think some carefully controlled double-blind experiments would persuade me. I mean, seriously, it's not a trivial point. If sometimes people say, look, try lighting and heating your house by prayer rather than by connecting to the electricity supply, and that kind of challenge. And then, of course, the response is God will not be tested. That's not the way that you challenge the conception. But if there were ways that you could do it, repeatable, public, double-blind experiments which showed the actual efficacy of the operation of a deity in nature, that I'd find that pretty convincing.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that, all three of you.
So can I ask you a question? Can I follow that up?
Absolutely.
What would make you not believe?
David, the tough thing about that one is that a man with an experience is never at the mercy of a man with an argument. And I'm telling you something that is impossible to say without, I'm sure, you shaking your head, rolling your eyes, all those things. I know Jesus Christ, and that may sound foreign, all these things are crazy, but I'm telling you from the bottom of my heart, I've not only seen the historical facts that we've talked about tonight, the cerebral side, and I have not checked that out, but I've seen him do work. I have not seen him cure cancer across the world, and I've seen hurts and heartaches in my own life in which he did not answer the prayer, but I've seen him work in my life. So it's almost an impossibility for me to change. And I don't mean that to be... Does that mean
you don't have free will? I mean, can we just talk about that for a second? Because now, a lot of times when people ask me, okay, well, what would make you believe? I've been asked that a few times, and I've always answered pretty much the same way. Show me a miracle and I'll believe. And the response to that is, well, if you did that, if God did that, he would take away your free will. Now... And that would take away your free. Well, yeah, that's why he doesn't do it. The free will argument says God won't take away your free will by showing himself to you. So my question to you is this: do you have free will, or is this an argument that you don't use?
I certainly feel like
I got nods in the back over here. You're not saying that.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
So.
I want to honor your time, but I'm glad to open up the panel over here, but I want to be respectful of your time.
Go ahead.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Any of you?
Yeah.
You said some of them were shaking their head.
Yeah, I don't think God revealing himself to you takes away your free will. I mean, Actually, I haven't heard that argument before.
Haven't either.
You haven't heard that argument?
Very interesting.
I get it all the time.
No.
Interesting.
Really?
Really?
I hear that all the time. Preachers over here on the right. Okay, so how many people, just raise your hands, if you've heard the argument that if God shows himself to you in any specific way, you lose free will?
Very interesting.
So there is a version of the argument that people might have heard of, which is that the reason why there is moral evil in the world is because God has allowed us to choose whether we're going to go with him or not with him. And so if God were to reveal himself in some really plausible way, you didn't think you got mad or had too much to drink or something, if you really were convinced that this was God, then you couldn't do ill. So you have lost your free will.
Yeah, that's not a point we tend to make.
No,
Okay, never mind.
And because a lot of what's the Bible bases itself on is God showing himself to people, and so that would not be an argument we would make at all. In fact, this is probably not politically correct to say either, but one of the things that we get from people of other faiths who convert to Christianity is they see visions of a man in white who brings them. I mean, I've talked to people of multiple faiths who prayed for God to reveal himself, and they saw a vision of a man in white who called himself Jesus, and that was what convinced them. I've never had that, so I don't know, but we hear that a lot. That's
a very interesting thought, a prevailing thought that you've heard from believers. I'm glad that you brought that up before the close of the night. That's pretty important. So thank you. Let me mention one item, and then I'll give David last words. There's information about the conference outside. I wanted to let Amanda know that. So it's out there. And likewise, the information about the conference is out there. I want to invite you all to Easter services at the Church of Your Choice all around Austin on Sunday. Wonderful resurrection celebrations. And so maybe there's some in the room that'll do both. I don't know. So just wanted to say that. David, thank you once again. Would you all give David Silverman a hand? Kathleen Johnson and Anthony Grayling.